Hello, I'm Joel Blackford with Beth Sabbath Fellowship. Normally we meet every Sabbath, but not during this COVID-19 time frame, so we're still locked out of the building, so please don't show up this week. What the series is on is the philosophy of eschatology, what you need to know during the end of days, your reality. Why were you born for such a time as this? It's more philosophical. Today's it's not a teaching so much. It's questions. It's looking at some numbers and just seeing what we think of the 400 years that have occurred, and it's rather historic. I mean, you can't disprove the fact that these events occurred in 1620 and 1220. So let's take a peek and see what you think. So I have been studying these generational crises, these generational changes for years, and trying to figure out, is William Strauss accurate on this? And he's the primary writer on this, the fourth turning. So the first turning was high, and then the second turning was this euphoria and defiance and things like that. Then the third turning was unraveling, and then the fourth turning is crisis. We seem to be in the crisis mode right now. We have spent all of our money. We are so far in debt as a nation, as a world actually too, but America is the worst abuser of that. And at some point in time, we're supposed to flip over into the first turning again, that high again, okay? And so will we? I argue that we aren't going to be able to flip into that this time, what changes with Strauss's opinion is that we have nuclear weapons that are much more powerful. So these constant turnovers of these generations are going to end at some point in time. It just can't run forever. But I like his arguments. So I argue this way. Alexander Tytler, he's a Scottish fellow, and Blackford is from Scotland. So about the time our original 13 states adopted their new constitution in 1787, Alexander Tytler, a Scottish history professor at the University of Edinburgh, had this to say about the fall of the Athenian republic some 2,000 years prior. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time the voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to a loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. So there's this tendency. And Strauss isn't really factoring those things into his discussion. He sees the turns, but he doesn't see that democracy fails itself when you vote yourself the generous gifts. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history have been about 200 years. During those 200 years, those nations always progress through the following sequence, which is very similar to what Strauss is talking about. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance, we've seen that, people, to complacency. Oh, we're seeing that. From complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage. We're heading towards bondage, okay? Now, this is from Joseph Olson, the professor at Hamline University. I went to Hamline. I was going to go to law school, but I got married instead. Um, he believes that we are between complacency and apathy, and 40% of the nation's population already having reached the governmental dependency phase. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Joseph Olson. As always, I try to teach you from the Bible. I try to give you the old-fashioned prophets, the new prophets, whichever ones are accurate, and I try to give you something based on the news. And I'll give you some history today. So first we're going to dig into the Bible just so we can look at a couple of phrases that really matter in terms of the fullness of the Gentiles. It's a prophetic phrase first used in Genesis 49:19. And it is used at an odd time when you have this cross-headed blessing. So, you've got Joseph coming with his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to meet with Yaakov, their father, Israel, and receive the blessing because he's about ready to die. And so I'm reading right to left, the people, he shall be great, but truly his brother, the younger, shall be greater. And then he and his descendants shall become Melo HaGoyim. Okay, do you see it there by the Genesis 49:19? So that would be like filling with fishes, okay? And Ephraim is, You know, I can't remember. Yeah, Ephraim is more like filled with fishes. Yeah, yeah. So that would be very accurate in terms of comparing it to fishes and the fullness of the nations, the Gentiles, the Goyim. And so then I'll get into the Luke time frame here in just a moment, but I want to explain Plerehu, which is filled to fill a net with fish. And this is from Spiros Zodhiates. And when Jesus said he came not to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill, thus he has fully satisfied the requirements of the law to be the Messiah. So he didn't end the law, he fulfilled it so he could die and then resurrect and return as our Messiah. So that's what it means in terms of the fullness of the Gentiles, or the fullness of fish, or the fullness of time until Yeshua returns. He has fully satisfied, and he is our offering. In this case, it would be an Ola offering. I would think of Yeshua. He was totally burned up for us. We didn't eat him, so to speak. Although you could say we're not going to go down consubstantiation or transubstantiation, or yeah, we're not going to go down that road. So anyway, let's go to Luke now, and so we're going to read from left to right in this case. To the people, this, and then verse 24 of chapter 21, and they will fall by the edge of the Mechira sword, and they will be led captive into the nations, the ethne, all, and Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles, the ethnon, until that Plerehu, okay, also shall be the times of the Gentiles. So basically, it is Melo HaGoyim, the fullness of the Gentiles. So you see it first in Genesis 49:19 during the special blessing that's very prophetic. Then you see Yeshua stating it, and you don't know this specifically, but Luke 21:24 is that time frame where Yeshua is on the Mount of Olives, and he's discussing the answer to the question, when are you going to return again? So he's comparing it to the fullness of the Gentiles, okay? And then we see it from Paul also. So Paul would hit this in Romans 11:25. Not for I want you to be ignorant, brothers, of the mystery, and that's mysterion in the Greek, this that shall not be, you shall be in yourselves wise. So you think of yourself so brilliant, but you don't understand that there's been a hardening in part of Israel that's happened until the Melo HaGoyim, okay? The pleroma, it's it's close to plerehu. You can see it's one digit off in terms of the Strong's number, and it is in the same family. The fullness, the fishes of the Gentiles come to their fullness, okay? And so pleroma, ton, ethnon. So, and then may come in. And then verse 26, and so all Israel will be saved, as it has been written, will come out of Zion, the one delivering, he will remove their shame, basically. So that is Paul agreeing with the other two writers, Moses and Yeshua, we'll say, even though it was Luke. I don't know. I still think that Luke was working with Mary on that, because the insights that he has had seem to be Mary driven. So let's look at some other verses and compare and contrast them. So this is Genesis 15, and this is Abraham receiving his sleepy blessing from God, because he fell asleep as this covenant was cut with him. Okay, so and he said unto Abraham, God did, know of surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve, I will judge, and afterward they shall come out with a great substance. But thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. That means he'll die. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. And in the fourth generation, so he's comparing 400 years to the fourth generation, because at that point in time they lived about 110 years, 110. Abraham lived, oh goodness, 167, I think it was. Joseph lived 110. And it came to pass that when the sun went down, and there was a thick darkness, and behold, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch that passed between the two pieces, and in that day God made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed I have given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So that's from Genesis 15. So that I want you to just note the 400 years and the fourth generation. Just start noting it, because that's what this video is all about. So I just want to cover one other thing in terms of the fullness of the Amorites, the Amori. The Talmud explains it this way, Darkei ha-Amori, the ways of the Amorite. So for some odd reason, they had to reach their fullness of wickedness, and it was heathen practices. And so Israel was not supposed to marry into these people because they would have flipped into a wicked generation within one generation. So don't walk on their statutes. Don't do the things that the land of Canaan does. So these Amorite practices and all these things. This is from the Jewish Virtual Library. So just an idea of the Amorites. I guess I'm kind of covering here that there is a time for genocide when they're so wicked, so depraved, and it's only in the land. You'll notice there's no genocide outside of the land of Israel, and these people were given the opportunity to pick up and leave, but they didn't, and they died. And there is a genocide going on there, but there's a complete wickedness of the people. And once it's inside of their nefesh, their soul, we'll call it, uh, there is only one choice. They won't leave, they have to die. That's the only time that you see genocide in the Bible. Okay, so now this is Hebrew again. We're in Genesis 15. I want to just show you one more time the Hebrew just so you can see how it's not Melo HaGoyim, but it's close. So, and you shall go to your fathers in peace, shalom, in shalom, ba shalom. You shall be buried at a good old age, a tov. Tova. But in the generation of the fourth, okay, so that's Arba, the fourth, Hene, for not complete. Shalem, okay? So instead of shalom above, this is shalem, and that is complete. It is. And shalom is a complete piece. But in this case, if it's shalem, and you wouldn't know the difference unless, you really know your Hebrew in context, but this is shalem, and it is a complete iniquity, avon. So that is willful sin in the Hebrew. Unfortunately, in the Greek, it's always amartia, really. I mean, there's no difference between, an avon sin, a pasha sin, and a chatat sin, chata. There's no difference between them. But there's the amari. You can see them yet is not there yet. So the fullness, the completeness, the shalem in this case, which is an interesting way to state it. Their wickedness is not complete yet, okay? And then when we move to Daniel 8:23, you see something somewhat similar to this. So in 23 then, so the Acharith, which is a code word for the end times, like eschatos, okay? So the Acharith of their kingdom, the Malakutem, their fullness, and that is tamam, and I show that down below. There's pasha, so that's kind of like a von, okay? A von is a willful sin, a rebellious sin, excuse me, is pasha, shall arise a king, a fierce king. That's the Antichrist, okay? And he would be a rebellious king. Pasha works perfectly for him, and who understands sinister schemes. So I just want to show you that there is a fullness of transgressions at that point in time, or transgressors. And tamam is like complete, finished, shall come to an end, consumed, exhausted, spent. And so it works in this case. These are these countdowns, maybe 400 years. In the case of Daniel, it's more like 490 years. But there's a count of there's oh goodness, I should know this. The 490 less 7 years less 483 years, I think it is. Okay, so basically he's got his 49 years. Yes, I forgot about the 49-year count from there too. So 7 and 49. So let's continue on to 2 Thessalonians and see how Paul uses this, and then Stephen's sermon from Acts 7:6. So we're once again left to right. God, not pleasing that all men who are set against hindering us. So Paul's complaining that people are stopping them from preaching to the Gentiles, speaking to them, and that's ethnos again, that they might be saved. So there's the plerehu word, okay, to fill up their sins, hamartia. As I mentioned, that could be chata. It could be just any type of a sin. In the Greek, it's rather non-specific. Always has come upon them the wrath to the utmost. So that's orge, that's wrath, and there are two different words used for wrath of God in Revelation. There's orge, and I'm blanking on the other one right now, and then telos, which could be the continuation too. So at some point in time, God is going to judge, and so there's a fullness of the Gentiles in terms of being hindered to preach to them, and that is a sin, and God will judge it at the end of time. okay, during the wrath time. The bowls will be poured out on those. And you can see at Revelation 16 how the bowls are poured out based on the wrath of God. And you could also argue the three last trumpets, which are the three woes. That's horrible too. That's wrath of God. So then we move on to Acts 7:6. And Stephen's speech spoke, however, thus God that will be the seed of him, a sojourner in the land, strange, and he will enslave it and will mistreat it 400 years. So Stephen corroborates the 400 years and the nation which, if, okay, so basically Stephen's saying the same thing. 400 years, 400 years. So why am I doing that? I'm going to show you a couple more verses and then we'll get to the 400 years and it'll make more sense. To yourselves, the sons, you are those having murdered the prophets. And this is Matthew 23:32 now. And you shall fill up, there's the plereho, the measure of the fathers of you, serpents, offspring, vipers. How can you escape from the sentence of hell? And so there is that fill up the measure, and it doesn't say ethnos in this case, but it does say that in Matthew 23, there will be this fulfillment of murdering the prophets. And you'll also see that, you see that in the fifth seal, that there's a certain amount of deaths, and then God pours it back out of the wicked. Then as we move on to Romans 10:4, I just wanted to show you one more word that's used for filling up. So plereho, you see up above there, that's 41:37, but now we're going to use telos in this case, which could be the tamid, for the end, for the tamid, the tamid lamp, the continuous lamp, the continuation of the law is the Messiah unto righteousness to everyone believing. And that's from Romans 10:4. And so I would argue as when you see the word ace in there, that it means continuous tamid type of a lamp, that Yeshua is the continuation of the law, not just the end of the law, as most Christians would argue. That's why I'm a messianic. Okay, now we get to go into the 400 time frames. So now we're going back. So we're in 2020 right now. If we go back to 1620, I'll tell you what's going on there in just a moment. But first, we're going to go back to 1220, the Great Charter of Freedoms, the Magna Carta. And it was set up because the kings had too much power and the church needed freedom. And so the king was kind of imposing his will on the church. And so he couldn't overtax then. King John must be less harsh on the barons, gave England the basis of a legal system, which is the Magna Carta, promised to have laws that were good and fair. No freeman would be punished without going through a proper trial. Okay, and so King John died officially in 1220, and so it took effect in 1215, but really when he died, that's when it kicked in because all rulers after that. And so he ruled with absolute power until 1215, and in many ways they took away the power gradually until 1220. Okay, so the Magna Carta was published after his death, more so, and so that's when it really took over. And so down below it shows that the Magna Carta was the cornerstone of the U.S. Constitution. So let's look at the U.S., and this is 1620, and it's November 11th of 1620 when they set up their Magna Carta at Plymouth Rock. So it was the Mayflower Compact at that point in time, and they signed it on November 11th, which is, we're coming up to the 400-year anniversary of it. The Melo HaGoyim of that, the plereho, okay, of fishes, so to speak. And so they got together and signed this, and here it is from 1620, and it talks about how they wanted equal rights and freedoms and things like that, and they allowed indentured servants to sign off on this too. So now we're going to move into comparing and contrasting with that time frame in 2020. So first of all, we'll look at the fact that Wednesday, the 11th of November of 1620, is 15 of Cheshvan of 5381. And so that is, there's a wonderful festival called Sukkot in the Bible, but there's also a horrible festival in 1 Kings 12, 32 and 33, and it's actually the whole chapter of 12, setting up that Jeroboam instituted a festival in the 8th month, 1 month after the true month, on the 15th day of the month, similar to the festival held in Judah. He went up to the altar at Bethel to sacrifice the calves he had made, and he placed on Bethel the Kohanim. So he set up false Kohanim, false pastors he had appointed for the high places. He went up to the altar which he had set up at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had chosen on his own, and instituted a festival for the people of Israel. He went up to the altar to burn incense. He's not supposed to do that. And so it's intriguing that that is set up on the 15th of Cheshvan, which is the time that the pilgrims came to America in 1620. And you can see down below there, 11th November, 15th Cheshvan, no doubt about it, okay? And so now I'll just show you our year, which will start very soon, the new year, which will be 5781. And in October, you have the True Sukkot. That sounds wonderful. And Yom Kippur on the 28th, and then the True Sukkot in October. It starts on 14 Tishri, which would be the 2nd of October, and it moves its way through the 11th. Technically, that's Simchat Torah and Shemini Atzeret. Okay, the day before that on the 10th of the 11th. Now, if you move to the Evil Festival, and that would be based on the exact day is the 11th of November, but technically 15 Cheshvan is the 2nd of November, which is interesting. And then it starts this festival out, and the election day is on the 3rd, which is interesting. And I'll give you another prophetic word that matches up with this. So I'm just showing you these 400-year time frames, and I'm saying that that's Jeroboam's false Sukkot. And I'm also going to show you that it matches up with 2012 also, which is very, very interesting. So, November 3rd, 2020, the election, okay, Cheshvan 17, that's the day of Noah's flood, according to the rabbis, and it's hard to argue with that. It's a logical day. And then if you run the calculations through, based on if this was the year that we went in, you would have to run out 2,520 days. Well, that would be 11/6 of 2020 would take you 2,520 days to 10/1/2027, which is Rosh Hashanah. That's the day. So if this would be the year, that would be 7 years later. It's just interesting. I'm not saying that it's going to happen this year, but 19 Cheshvan would work out just fine. That's during that false Sukkot of 1 Kings 12, and it would, every year I watch it, people. Every year I watch from Rosh Hashanah all the way through to this time frame, this false Sukkot, to see what's happening. So I'm just telling you, watch during that time frame, if this is that year or another year. But that's where your day counts work all the way through. And then back to 2012, I was publishing a book, and I met with another person that also published with my publisher, and he said, I have a message for the pastor and the elders. There will be a catastrophic storm this fall after Sukkot, but before the end of October, the sign of this storm will be snow and a broom. And after prodding, he said the third seal opened this summer. So on Halloween of 2012, we had this horrible storm, Hurricane Sandy. And then also during that week, we had a divided election of 2012. And then we also had the snow and the broom as the storm first Sandy hit, and then it just turned it all into snow. And so on the last day, the last great day of the false Sukkot, we had the big snow and the broom storm. And so, as I mentioned, the Jeroboam, so here it is down below. You can see the 11/6 election, 10/31 Halloween, and then the last day was when the snow and the broom came through from that storm. And so that was Wall Street, people. That was what was hit, and that meant the third seal opened up. And you're seeing it right now. You're seeing the food prices go through the roof. And so you know that scarcity will happen and things will get much worse. Then the other factor that you have to put into this is Pastor Dana Coverstone and his prophecies with the red shirt and the white shirt. So please go to LWM video. Don't go to the other people's videos, because just get the true videos yourself. Don't get the interpretation the first time. But he's just saying that in November, so he had the earlier dreams, the first 3 dreams, and he said something was going to happen in March and then June, and then, or maybe it was, I don't know, it was the first 2 times of the year. And then it was going to be bad in September and bad, horrible in November. So just keep that in mind. That matches with that false Sukkot. It matches with the election of this year. And he saw chaos, armed protesters fighting in the streets, people pummeling one another, schools are closed, just horrific, absolute chaos. And he kept on hearing these words: brace yourself, brace yourself, brace yourself. Are you prepared that the Great Tribulation should begin at some point in time. Maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after that. I don't know. But keep in mind that his dream sequence has been accurate so far, and it makes sense. So are we reaching the fullness of our 400 years? I don't know. The two witnesses would show up beforehand. We're still not into the fourth seal yet. Well, I mean, we have not seen 1.944 billion people die. And so we are not through the seals yet. They're the birth pangs, but yet we will see the two witnesses probably during our lifetime. We'll see the trumpets. The last three are woes, and then the bowls pour out, and that would be over a 7-year progression. The directions of the seals match with Zechariah 1 and 6, and the seals look like birth pangs, people. These are the birth pangs that Yeshua talked about, Matthew 24. There's the seals that correspond to them. And so I believe the first 3 seals are open. We're waiting for seal number 4, which would be a horrific amount of death, and that potentially could happen at any point in time in a year. Then seal 5 would be martyrdom, and seal 6 would be asteroids falling from heaven and an earthquake, and there have been a lot of asteroids lately. So hopefully I made sense with you with my 400-year sequences. I want you to pray and fellowship with others as much as possible and be ready for the fall, people. I think you should prep in prayer and prep with food and water and prepare your family in case things really go south. So take care and be blessed.